So in today's video, I'm going to discuss about the concept of citations. So basically, most researchers are used to publishing papers, and when somebody is a PhD student, their main job is to publish papers in good journals. And so people have a good concept about doing some good research, writing this whole thing down, and then creating a paper out of it. Now, if you have been in the research business for a sufficient long time, you start hearing of words such as citations, scientometrics, and various measures to measure scientific productivity of a person. So let me start with the most basic measure, which is the citation. So now let's assume you have published a paper, and then a year or two have gone by. And now you go to your library or you download a certain paper from the web and you find a new paper written by somebody else. And as you are perusing this paper, you are going through the introduction, the abstract, conclusions, and the reference section. You see your name in the reference section. So your publication has been cited by this person in this new paper. So this is basically called a citation. So what this means is that your work has been cited by somebody else, and why this matters is because this means that your paper has made some impact in the field and this person has thought it sufficiently worthy that it should be cited in his paper. So this is known as a citation. So now once this has happened, you have got a citation and your paper has been cited once by this particular person in a specific journal. So what happens is, as you publish papers through your career, your papers get cited, and some papers get cited more, and of course some papers get cited less. Now as your citations build up, this particular metric can be used to quantify a researcher. Now in the old days, there was just one piece of data which was there, and that was about the number of publications a person published and the quality of the journals where his or her work was published. So most of the decisions in terms of recruitment, promotion, fellowships, prizes, and so on were made by going through the person's publication list, looking at the topic of the different papers, then seeing the journals where this person has published, and then also contacting various referees in the field who are experts in that particular subdomain of research, and then getting letters of reference from these referees. So this is still the standard format of measuring scientists as far as research is concerned, and in fact of measuring scholars in general who have done a PhD or who are in this research field. But what happened is that somewhere in the last 10 years or so, the computer search algorithms became very powerful. And so you have systems such as Google Scholar, Web of Science, and Scopus, which essentially track the citations of people as they build up through the years. So today it is possible to go to Google Scholar, type the name of a person or type the name of a certain publication, title or name of a paper, and to get the information about the citations that have come for this paper or this person and so on. So again, citations have now become an important metric by which people are not only comparing scientists but also comparing fields of research, universities, research institutions, countries, and so on. Now, of course, there are both good and bad aspects of any new development, and so again for this particular theme also there are good and bad aspects. So let's start with the good aspects first. The one thing which citations and measures based on citations has done is it lets you compare people across different institutions and different parts of the world without necessarily giving importance to the prestige of the institution or to the country in question. So a certain cross comparison has become possible across different institutions around the world and also across different scientists around the world. So in case you are a scientist in some lab somewhere in the world and your citations are very good, then it can be concluded that your work has made some impact in the research field. One more good point about citations is that you tend to know who are citing your work, and therefore this can be used to figure out who are the important people in the field, and you can go to the papers of these people who are citing your work and then see exactly in what context they are citing your work, and maybe by reading their paper you may get some new concept about pursuing research in the future. Now, one more thing which happens in citations is that it's very field dependent. So there are certain fields where there are a lot of people working in that field. For example, if we take chemistry or material science, there are a very large number of scientists working in these fields, and they are also very prolific. And the prolific nature happens because these fields are very fertile in terms of concepts, and therefore many papers are published and many scientists cite these papers. So typically a scientist working in fields such as chemistry and material science will have much higher citation than somebody who is working in a recondite field such as mathematics or mathematical physics and so on. So this is something to keep in mind, that when we are comparing citations of two people or two institutions or two countries, we need to compare it only for a specific field. So it's valid to compare citations across all material science communities, but not between material science and mathematical physics. Now, a possible caveat about the use of citations is that you may get citations for a work which may not be correct. So this is possible, and for example, consider a situation where a person has made a mistake in a paper and then 25 people have pointed out this particular mistake in a future publication. So this person has got 25 citations, but these are not positive citations. These are actually people who have pointed out a mistake in his or her paper. And therefore you need to keep this in mind. So this is rare, but this is a possibility which can take place in certain situations. Now, there's also the issue of self-citation. So this happens when a person cites his own work. So for example, let's say you write a paper and this is a sequel to certain previous work which you have done. So maybe you wrote a paper on a theory and then you wrote a work on computation, and now you are writing a third paper where you have done some validation and got some experimental data. So in this paper you have cited your previous two papers in the reference section. So this is a legitimate self-citation, because what you have done is you have basically pointed out the growth of your research, how your previous works have led to your current research and so on. Now, of course, this is completely legitimate, but what happens in some cases is people may cite a whole lot of their own papers in their current paper in a very broad context. And so, while most search algorithms would capture this self-citation, there are some places where you can actually separate the self-citation out, and then you can look at the person's citations with self-citation and without self-citation. So I would generally say it's okay to cite your own papers provided they are relevant to your current work, and in fact it's necessary to cite your papers if you have taken some material from there and further expanded the context of that material in the current paper. But it's not good to just cite your own work randomly in order to increase your citation count, because that comes across as a negative in the eyes of most people. Now, of course, whenever you have a metric, then people may try to game it, and that's a problem. So that's a dark side of what sometimes happens is research, is that people form citation cabals, and there are groups around the world who may cite papers between themselves, and this may increase their citation. So again, this is not something very good and needs to be kept in mind when looking at citations of people. Now, of course, generally we can say more citations is better for a researcher or for an institution, but you need to keep in mind that people pick up citations as they grow in age, and therefore it's very difficult for a junior scientist or researcher to have a lot of citations. And it's also very natural for a very senior person to have a large number of citations. So we also need to keep track of how the citations change with time. So the temporal variation of citation is also something you need to see. So now these are some of the facts about the world of citations which has come out recently, I would say in the last decade or so. And it's primarily come out because of the computer science methods in search, which are able to look at all the literature throughout the world and give you the various citations which are there for the papers. So again, going to the fundamental websites which give you these citations, the Google Scholar essentially gives you citations for all possible publications. So that may include journal papers, conference papers, books, theses, and so on. Whereas Web of Science and Scopus focus more toward journal and known conferences. And in that, Web of Science is further restrictive in terms of journal, and Scopus has a more expanded list of journals. So again, the citations would be different based on the search which you are using. But of course, Google Scholar is free, so that's something which people can use without much problem. So again, if you have published some papers, it's worthwhile to create a profile for yourself in Google Scholar so that people can check out your citations and you yourself can see your citations and follow the papers who are citing you. So again, if you are somewhat in trepidation because of all the complexity with citations, what I would suggest is just concentrate on writing good quality papers in good quality journals, and then the citation issue and various problems associated with citation will naturally take care of themselves in the long run. So that's not something I would say a researcher should spend much time in worrying. But there is something you can do to legitimately increase your citations, and that is to try to publicize your work as much as possible. So when you publish a paper, you can use the various digital media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, ResearchGate, and so on to publicize the fact that you have published a paper. And maybe if there are important people in your field, you can send a link of your publication to these people so that they know you have published a paper. Because in case they do not know that you have published a paper, then there is no chance that your work is going to be cited. So of course they can take a look at your paper, determine its usefulness for their research, and then they can cite the paper if it's necessary for them. So these are some points I had today on the concept of citation. I think I used this concept before in some of my videos and did not discuss the details about this concept. So some people asked me to discuss this concept today. So I hope this video was useful for you, and again please stay tuned to my channel and I'll get back to you in a future video. Thank you very much.